Welcome back to the Sisula ETL Framework, and let's see if we can get some things running this time. So first, I think I'm going to show you the actual target for this collision data, the model in which we are going to store this. So I have it open here. This is as you can see, a very simple model. It's just to illustrate and exemplify how the framework actually works. So what you can see here is that you have two anchors. One is the street, the other one is intersection. All the interesting stuff is actually happening at intersections. For some reason you don't collide with vehicles in other places in Manhattan. It's always an intersection. So what is an intersection? Well, an intersection consists of two streets. It's an intersecting street and a crossing street. So street is referenced 2 times here. The street has a name, so you know which street it is. And the intersection, then, the actual measurements that we want to keep track of that we get from the file is how many vehicles have been in collisions in this intersection, how many people have been injured at this intersection, and how many collisions in total have there been at this intersection, and how many have been killed at this particular intersection. So this is the model that we will be loading using the framework. So let's see if we can go back to the framework here. There it is. And in order to do so, we actually need some things in the database, because right now I believe it's absolutely empty. So let's go back here to the run all. You could have 3 different databases here, but we have 2. We have the traffic database, which is the one that you saw the model of. Then we have the staging area. You don't have to create a model for that. The staging area is populated using the definition that you have in the source XML file. So we need to create these 2 databases. So I'm going to start SQL Server here, Management Studio. So we're going to look at creating some databases. So right now I don't have anything. So let's create a new database called traffic. I'm just going to leave everything at defaults, because the files that we have are very small anyway. So well, we could at least perhaps do. We don't need full recovery. Usually it's simple. Okay. And we need the staging database called stage. And definitely simple recovery on that one, like that. So now we have 2 databases, traffic and stage. Now we actually have to put something into these databases as well, because like I said, we had one of the things that we have is our own type checking function that the framework uses. So we're going to open up one of the files here. Open file, and it's on the desktop, on the Sisula 1.04. So I'm going to start with, in the code directory, you have something called create utilities. So this will actually create an assembly called utilities with the .NET code, which is actually in binary form, this thing over here. Then it creates 2 different functions that the framework will use. One is the isType, it's the generic type checking function. And the second one is called a splitter. I'm going to explain that later, why we need that one. So just going to execute this one in the staging database. Okay. So now, if I go down to programmability and functions and scalar, you can see you have this isType here. The splitter is actually a table valued function. This is the one that actually splits input data according to a regular expression. Alright, so now we have some of the prerequisites, but not all of them. We also need to create the metadata model, the model in which we are going to store the metadata that this framework is generating when we're running it. So I need to open a few more files here. I'm going to go here and up one folder and into the metadata folder. And these are numbered, so you know in which order to create them. This is also actually an anchor model, so you could look at it if you load this XML file into our modeling tool. So this just creates a schema that's called metadata, and this is the schema that will contain all of the tables and views and everything that has to do with the metadata model. This creates the model, so this is actually code generated from our modeling tool, an anchor model here, so let's execute it. There you go. And let's see, we should be on file number 3 now, which actually inserts some values into the different knots that we have in the metadata model. Just some stuff like the execution status of a job. Is it successful? Was it a failure? Or is it still running? What type of containers are we working with? Is it a file? Is it a table? Or is it a view? The framework will actually also store the XML files in the database. So you can always go back and look at which XML file actually generated the version of the code that I'm running right now. So you have to store workflows, sources, and targets definitions into the database as well. So I'm going to execute this, and we're going to open the final one, which is the logging procedures. So this is when the SQL Server agent, which is actually what is driving the framework, when it is running and executing different jobs, it also logs into this metadata when a job was started and finished, and if it was successful or failed, etc., etc. So in order to do so, it uses some store procedures that it calls. So I'm going to execute this one to create those store procedures. So now everything is set in the staging area. So if you open tables, you can see now that, wow, we have a lot of different metadata tables here. Great stuff to look at later. We haven't done anything yet with the traffic, which is where we're going to be storing the results, the actual data warehouse in this case. So we need to create that one as well. So I'm going to go here and open a file again and move up one folder. There's something called model. In model, I have this traffic SQL code, which is also just the code generated from the tool that you saw earlier. So I'm in the traffic database, that's great, and I'm going to execute this one like that. And I will have a few tables here corresponding to what we saw graphically earlier, the intersection and the street with some attributes and the tie that we saw. Alright, so now everything is set up on that part as well. So now we should be able to start a command prompt. There. Oh, that was not the command prompt. It was probably a help window. Let's do it like this, run as administrator. Alright, so here we are. I'm going to change to the directory where we have the framework. I hopefully will do that. If I can find the backslash over here somewhere. Okay, let's do it like this since I can't find it. The user cd desktop, Sisula. Okay, so here we are, and we have the run all. So if I run it now, I'm going to uncheck that. I can open the file, and I can look at the directory again. So let's actually check. If I go here to the list of files and click on and sort this by date modified, you will see that what happened now, that when I ran the run all, was that I got 3 newly generated SQL files here: source, target, and workflow. So these I also need now to execute in the database, because there's nothing outside of the database that runs the framework. The framework actually only generates files that you execute in the database, and once you've done it, the framework lives after that in the database. So let's open up. To begin with, it doesn't really matter which order you do it, but let's do the workflow first. So this is generated SQL code. It will create a few different workflows. It will create one which is called NYPD vehicle staging. So if I click here on the agent now, there are, well, no jobs that we have specified anyway. Further down, you can see that it's going to create another job called NYPD vehicle loading instead. Okay, so let's execute this. Invalid object name, traffic metadata. All right. Let's see. I created the metadata in... Carelessly, I created the metadata in staging. I actually changed that, so let's just go back here and change this one back to stage. All right, and save it. So now I need to rerun this run all, because I need to have, or maybe I don't actually. So anyway, I'm doing it to make sure. So if I go here, it should say that this file has changed, so I'm going to reload it. Right, now I try it. Execute. Perfect. So let's see. Let's see here. Refresh. You can see here. Now I have 2 jobs, one staging job and one loading job. So clicking on the staging job here, you can see that it has a number of steps, and these steps correspond to the syslets that you saw in that directive file. So this is basically the different job steps. It's going to log the starting of this job, and it's going to create a raw table. It's going to create an insert view. It's going to do an actual bulk insert. It's going to create a split view, arrow view, type tables. It's going to split the raw data into the type tables. It's going to add some keys to the type tables, and then it's going to say whether or not it was successful or failed. So that's the job. Maybe we can look at one of the steps as well. For example, create the insert view. So if I look at that one, you can see that it executes a stored procedure called NYPD vehicle create insert view. And none of these procedures actually exist yet, because we haven't run the other 2 SQL files. So let's go and do the source SQL here. So if you look here at the stage database right now, in programmability and stored procedures, these are only the metadata stored procedures. So let's run this one. Okay. And if I now refresh, you will see that now I have the different stored procedures that actually do stuff in the framework. Create views, create tables, move data between tables. So let's close that one. And finally, we also need the target, not there, we also need the target SQL, which is the one that actually lifts data from the staging area into the anchor model. So here I have the target one, and it also creates a number of stored procedures. So if you look at the loading job, which is the actual job that lifts the data, you can see that it also has a number of steps where it's loading the streets, then it's loading the intersections in the first pass, then it's loading the tie, it's loading intersections again, and then it's done. Okay, so I'm going to run this one too. Okay, so now we have everything that we need to actually run this loading process in the database. So in the next video, we're going to run this and see what happens, and also look back at some of the files and try to understand what they do. So see you in the next video.